America has now crossed a staggering $27 trillion economy. Headlines everywhere are celebrating it as proof that the United States is still the undisputed economic superpower of the world. Politicians are taking credit, markets are cheering, commentators are calling it a historic milestone. So the American economic miracle is alive and well, right? No, not so fast. It's okay to be happy about $27 trillion, but do you realize that America today looks nothing like the America of the 1960s or even the America of the 1990s? And don't get me wrong, $27 trillion is a milestone. But here's the thing about milestones. Sometimes they mark progress, and sometimes they are just tombstones with better lighting. Because behind the $27 trillion flex is a silent, creeping danger that has already crushed countries across the world. And this time, the warning is not coming from conspiracy theorists or pessimists. It is coming from economists, data, and institutions that study growth for a living. This danger is not about America becoming poor overnight. It is about America becoming stuck in a high-income stagnation trap. For decades, the assumption has been that rich countries will just keep getting richer, that innovation will automatically happen, that productivity will naturally rise. But history tells a very different story. Many countries reach a certain level of wealth, and then their growth quietly slows down. Wages stagnate, inequality rises, opportunity narrows, and the economy keeps growing on paper, while the lives of ordinary people stop improving. In simple terms, it means America does not become the next version of its golden age. It risks becoming a rich country where progress no longer reaches the majority. Before we celebrate more GDP numbers, we need to look at what is actually happening inside the American economy. Because America today is already splitting into two very different realities. While one America celebrates record stock markets, booming tech valuations, and trillion-dollar companies, another America is struggling to pay rent, manage healthcare costs, and survive paycheck to paycheck. While one America works in high-paying knowledge jobs and builds wealth through assets, the other America works multiple jobs with stagnant wages and rising living costs. While one America invests in AI, stocks, and real estate, the other America is one medical emergency away from financial disaster. And both of these Americas are real. They exist in the same cities, sometimes on the same streets, and sometimes even in the same families. A $27 trillion economy with two Americas is not a success story. It is an incomplete story. But the good news is that this is not inevitable. In this case study, we will break down what this trap actually looks like, which countries have fallen into similar patterns before, what America can learn from both their failures and successes, and most importantly, what lessons history is screaming at policymakers today. To understand the danger America faces, we first need to understand how economic traps actually work. And for that, we need to look at countries that once looked unstoppable, but then quietly stalled. One of the most important examples comes from Malaysia. In the 1960s, Malaysia was a poor country filled with slums, low literacy, and limited opportunity. Average incomes were extremely low, and nearly half the population lived below the poverty line. But Malaysia decided to change its destiny. The government invested heavily in infrastructure, education, and ease of doing business. Roads, ports, and industrial zones were built at scale. Literacy rates surged. Foreign companies were invited in with tax breaks, cheap land, and stable policies. And it worked. Factories arrived, jobs exploded, exports boomed. In just a few decades, Malaysia transformed itself from an economic backwater into an Asian success story. Per capita income rose dramatically. Poverty fell. A middle class emerged. On paper, it looked like a miracle. But here is what most people forget about the Malaysian miracle. It was built almost entirely on one advantage: cheap labor. Malaysia became a global assembly hub. Multinational companies came not to innovate, but to manufacture. For a while, this strategy worked beautifully. But when wages rose, something dangerous happened. The same companies that had arrived so eagerly began to leave. Not because Malaysia failed, but because another country became cheaper. Vietnam, Indonesia, Bangladesh. Malaysia became more expensive without becoming significantly more innovative. It assembled, but it did not design. It exported, but it did not build global brands. So when the factories left, there was no new growth engine ready to replace them. The result was not collapse, but stagnation. Income growth slowed. Graduate underemployment surged. Highly educated young people found themselves working jobs far below their qualifications. The economy stopped climbing, even though it never crashed. This is what an economic trap looks like in real life. Now you might be thinking, this is interesting, but America is nothing like Malaysia. And you're right. America is far richer, far more advanced, far more innovative. But that is exactly why the American version of this trap is more subtle and more dangerous. America is not stuck in a low-income or middle-income trap. It is at risk of a high-income stagnation trap. To understand how countries escape this fate, we need to look at one of the most remarkable economic transformations in modern history: South Korea. In the 1960s, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. It had been devastated by war. It lacked natural resources. It relied heavily on foreign aid just to survive. Most observers believed it had no future. But South Korea had something powerful: a long-term generational vision. The first generation worked. They took brutal factory jobs in textiles, shipbuilding, and steel. Wages were low, hours were long. But these jobs created exports, and exports brought in foreign income. This lifted South Korea out of extreme poverty. The second generation studied. The government invested aggressively in education, especially science, engineering, and management. This transformed South Korea from a country that assembled products into a country that could design and improve them. Companies like Samsung moved from assembling televisions with foreign parts to designing their own components and technologies. And then came the third generation. Innovators. South Korea massively increased research and development spending. It built an ecosystem where innovation was not the exception, but the norm. The result was global brands, cutting-edge technology, and sustained productivity growth. South Korea climbed the value chain step by step, and that is why its per capita income skyrocketed from a few $100s to over $30,000 today. This was not luck. It was a deliberate strategy spanning generations. Now let's come back to America. On the surface, America looks incredibly strong. It has world-leading universities, global technology giants, deep capital markets, and unmatched military and political power. GDP keeps rising. Corporate profits are high. Stock markets reach new records. But when you look beneath the surface, cracks start to appear. Real wages for large sections of the population have barely grown for decades. Productivity growth has slowed compared to the post-war boom. Wealth inequality has exploded. The top 10% own the vast majority of financial assets, while millions of Americans struggle with housing, healthcare, and education costs. America is not one economy. It is multiple economies stacked on top of each other. The top tier lives in a world of capital gains, innovation hubs, and global mobility. The middle tier survives on fragile stability, constantly exposed to financial shocks. And the bottom tier faces chronic insecurity, limited upward mobility, and declining life outcomes. This is not how sustained prosperity works. Just like Malaysia relied too long on cheap labor, America is increasingly relying on asset inflation, financialization, and debt-driven consumption instead of broad-based productivity growth. Innovation still exists, but it is increasingly concentrated. Education still exists, but access and outcomes are unequal. Manufacturing still exists, but supply chains are fragile and uneven. This is how stagnation begins. Slowly, quietly, without a dramatic collapse. So what is the solution? History gives us a clear framework: investment, infusion, innovation. Investment means rebuilding real economic foundations, infrastructure, affordable education, healthcare systems that don't bankrupt families, and policies that reward productive work instead of speculation. Infusion means climbing the value chain continuously, adopting new technologies, upgrading skills, and ensuring that workers move with the economy instead of being left behind by it. And innovation means sustained, broad-based investment in research, development, and human capital, not just in elite pockets, but across society. South Korea made innovation systemic. Malaysia did not. That difference explains everything. The question facing America is not whether it is rich today. It clearly is. The question is whether it is building the foundations for shared prosperity tomorrow, because GDP alone does not define success. People do. And a 27 trillion economy that fails to lift the majority is not the end of the story. It is the warning at the beginning of one. If this analysis made you uncomfortable, that's a good thing. Real patriotism is not blind celebration. It is the courage to confront reality and fix it. America still has the tools, the talent, and the time to choose the right path. The only question is whether it has the will. If you found yourself questioning assumptions, rethinking what growth really means, or seeing the economy through a new lens, then this case study has done its job. These are exactly the conversations that shape better decisions, better policies, and a better future. Stay curious, keep questioning the numbers behind the headlines, and keep engaging with ideas that go deeper than surface-level optimism. Because understanding the economy is not about celebrating big numbers. It is about understanding what they actually mean for real people.